The blood-red sunset painted the dusty town of Silverridge as Delilah Prescott collapsed onto the weathered boardwalk, her body so ravaged by illness that even drawing breath seemed an impossible task. 3 weeks of fever had stolen everything: her strength, her family, and now, it seemed, her very will to live. Yates Zimmerman hadn't planned on stopping in Silverridge. The tall, broad-shouldered cowboy with eyes the color of a stormy sky was simply passing through, his sights set on the cattle drives further west. But fate had other plans when he spotted the young woman crumpling to the ground outside the general store, her face gaunt and pale as moonlight. "Miss." "Miss," Yates called out, dismounting his chestnut mare in one fluid motion and rushing to her side. The woman's eyes, a striking shade of amber, fluttered open briefly before rolling back as consciousness slipped away from her again. Without hesitation, he scooped her frail body into his arms, shocked at how little she weighed. Her skin burned with fever against his calloused hands. "Someone help," he shouted, looking around the nearly empty street. A few curious onlookers emerged from the saloon and nearby shops, but no one stepped forward until the town doctor appeared, wiping his hands on a cloth as he hurried from his office across the street. "Bring her in here, doctor," Finley instructed, leading Yates to a small building with a weathered sign that read "Medical Office." The doctor, a man with silver hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, quickly assessed the situation. "Where did you find her?" "Just out there on the boardwalk." "Don't know who she is," Yates replied, carefully laying the unconscious woman on the examination table. "Is she going to be all right?" Dr. Finley's expression was grim as he checked her pulse. "This is Delilah Prescott. Her folks died in the typhoid outbreak 3 weeks back. She was recovering at her homestead outside town, but..." He shook his head. "Looks like she tried to come into town for supplies. She's severely dehydrated, malnourished." Yates removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair, and ran a hand through it as he studied the woman's face. Even in her weakened state, there was something hauntingly beautiful about her delicate features. "Any family to look after her?" he asked, though he could guess the answer. "None. Parents are gone. Brother died in the war. She's all alone now," Dr. Finley confirmed. "I've been meaning to check on her, but with so many sick after the outbreak." He trailed off, guilt evident in his voice. Yates nodded, understanding the impossible burden the small-town doctor must be carrying. "I can take her back to her place," he offered, surprising even himself. "Get her settled, maybe find someone in town to help care for her." The doctor gave him a long, measuring look. "You're just passing through, aren't you, son?" "Yes, sir, heading to Wyoming for the season." Yates shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny, "but I can delay a few days." "Wouldn't be right to just ride on." Dr. Finley's expression softened. "You've got a good heart, Mr. Zimmerman, Yates Zimmerman." "Well, Mr. Zimmerman, if you're serious about helping, she needs more than just a ride home. She needs care, constant attention, food, water, medicine." The doctor moved to a cabinet and began gathering supplies. "She's too weak even to feed herself right now. Been this way for days, I'd wager." Yates hesitated, looking down at the unconscious woman. His plans didn't include playing nursemaid to a stranger, but something about Delilah Prescott stirred a protective instinct he hadn't known he possessed. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her face, or perhaps it was simply that no one else seemed willing to step up. "I can stay a week," he found himself saying. "Get her back on her feet, then I'll have to move on." The doctor nodded, handing him a small bundle of medicines and instructions. "Her place is about 2 miles east of town, small homestead with a red barn, can't miss it." An hour later, Yates found himself carrying the still unconscious Delilah into a modest but well-built cabin. The property showed signs of recent neglect, understandable given the circumstances, but had clearly been loved and well-maintained before tragedy struck. Inside, the home was simple but comfortable, with handmade quilts and curtains adding touches of color. He placed Delilah on the bed in what appeared to be the main bedroom, covering her with a quilt before setting about building a fire in the hearth. Once the room was warming, he fetched water from the well outside and set it to boil. Following Dr. Finley's instructions, he prepared a broth with dried meat and herbs he found in the kitchen, then moistened a cloth to cool her fever. Night had fallen by the time she stirred, her eyes opening with confusion and fear. "Who?" Her voice cracked from dryness, barely audible. "Name's Yates Zimmerman, madam," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "Found you collapsed in town. The doctor asked me to bring you home." Delilah's eyes darted around the room as if confirming his story, then settled back on his face. "Thank you," she whispered, "but you don't need to already done," he interrupted with a small smile. "Now, doctor says you need to get some broth in you. Think you can manage." She tried to sit up but fell back almost immediately, her arms trembling with the effort. Frustration and embarrassment colored her pale cheeks. I can't seem to." Without a word, Yates slipped an arm behind her shoulders and carefully propped her up against the pillows. He reached for the bowl of broth he'd prepared and held a spoonful to her lips. "No shame in needing help, Miss Prescott. We all do sometimes." After a moment's hesitation, she accepted the spoonful, then another. They continued in silence until she'd taken as much as she could manage, barely half the bowl, but it was a start. "Thank you," she murmured again as he eased her back down. "But you really don't have to stay, I'll be fine." Yates raised an eyebrow. "All due respect, madam, but you can barely lift your head, let alone take care of yourself. I told the doctor I'd stay a week, get you back on your feet." "A stranger shouldn't have to. I'm not a stranger anymore. Name's Yates, remember?" His smile was gentle but firm. "Get some rest now. We can argue about it tomorrow if you're feeling up to it." Despite her obvious desire to protest further, exhaustion claimed her, and she slipped back into sleep. Yates settled himself in a chair by the fire, prepared for a long night of vigilance. As he watched the flames dancing in the hearth, he wondered what had possessed him to detour from his carefully planned journey for a woman he didn't know. Yet somehow, leaving Delilah Prescott to fend for herself had never really been an option. Morning brought little improvement in Delilah's condition. Her fever still burned, though perhaps not quite as fiercely as before. Yates changed the cool cloth on her forehead and prepared more broth, this time adding a few vegetables from her small garden. "You're still here," she observed weakly when she awoke. "Said I would be," he replied, helping her sit up again. "Hungry?" She nodded slightly. "But I can try." Her attempt to reach for the spoon ended in failure, her hand trembling so badly that Yates gently intercepted it and guided it back to rest on the quilt. "Let me," he said quietly, lifting the spoon to her lips. The meal proceeded slowly, with Yates patiently offering one small spoonful after another. Between bites, Delilah studied him with curious amber eyes. "Why are you helping me?" she finally asked. "You don't know me. You're clearly not from around here." Yates considered the question as he stirred the cooling broth. "My ma raised me to help folks in need, said it was the measure of a man," he shrugged, slightly uncomfortable with her scrutiny. "Besides, nobody else was stepping up. Where were you headed before this?" "Wyoming. Got work lined up on a ranch for the season." He offered another spoonful, which she accepted. "Been working cattle drives mostly, but wanted something more steady for a while. I'm keeping you from your job. Job'll wait. Told them I might be late anyway." This was a lie, but one meant to ease her guilt rather than deceive. "Now, enough about me. Doctor said you need to take this medicine after eating." The next few days fell into a simple rhythm. Yates tended to Delilah, the homestead, and his own horse. He repaired a loose shutter, fixed a leaky roof, and cleared the overgrown garden while she slept. When she was awake, he fed her increasingly substantial meals, helped her take short walks around the room as her strength incrementally returned, and most importantly, talked to her. He learned that Delilah had grown up in Silverridge, the daughter of a schoolteacher father and a mother who had once been a singer in fancy hotels back east. They'd lost their son, her brother Jacob, at Gettysburg, and had been making a decent living from their small farm before typhoid swept through the area. "They got sick first," she explained on the fourth day, now able to sit up on her own but still too weak to feed herself properly. "I cared for them as best I could, but—" her voice broke. "After they passed, I thought I'd been spared. Then the fever hit me too, not as bad as some but bad enough." "You tried to go into town too soon," Yates observed, offering her a piece of bread he'd baked that morning. "We were out of everything, no food left." She took a small bite, chewing slowly. "I thought I was strong enough." Yates nodded, understanding all too well the stubborn pride that often led people to push beyond their limits. "Lucky I was riding through when I was." Their eyes met, and for a moment, something unspoken passed between them. Delilah looked away first, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. Dr. Finley says you're improving faster than he expected, Yates said, changing the subject. Said your constitution must be stronger than it looks. Or maybe it's the care I'm receiving, she replied softly. I don't know how to thank you, Mr. Zimmerman. Yates, he corrected. And you don't need to thank me. That evening, for the first time since he'd brought her home, Delilah managed to hold a cup of tea on her own, though her hands still trembled with the effort. The achievement brought tears to her eyes, which she quickly blinked away. Small victories, Yates said with an encouraging smile. Small victories, she echoed, returning his smile with a fragile one of her own. As the week Yates had promised stretched into 10 days, Delilah continued to improve. She could now feed herself soup and soft foods, though cutting meat remained beyond her abilities. Her color returned, and with it, glimpses of the vibrant woman she must have been before illness struck. Yates found himself increasingly drawn to her quiet strength and gentle humor. Despite everything she'd lost, Delilah maintained a resilient spirit that impressed him deeply. When she'd felt strong enough to venture to the porch swing one afternoon, she'd insisted he join her, and they'd watch the sunset together in comfortable silence. You need to go soon, don't you? She asked on the 12th day, as he helped her plait her long chestnut hair, a task her arms still tired too quickly to complete. His hands stilled for a moment before resuming their work. Getting to that time, he admitted, but not until you're steady on your feet. I can manage now, she insisted, though they both knew she was still far from fully recovered. The Hendersons said they'd check on me, Mrs. Fuller from church too. Yates tied off her braid with a ribbon and moved to face her. Delilah, he said seriously, can any of them stay with you? Day and night, she looked down at her hands, still thin but no longer skeletal. No, they have their own families, their own responsibilities. Then I'm not leaving yet. His tone brooked no argument. That evening, as they sat by the fire, Delilah asked about his life before Silverridge. Yates, usually reticent about his past, found himself telling her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing his father to a logging accident when he was 14, and taking to the trail at 17 after his mother remarried. You've never settled anywhere? She asked, watching his face in the firelight. Never found a reason to, he replied honestly. Always another horizon, another job. Freedom has its appeal. And its price, she added softly. He nodded, understanding what she meant. Freedom often meant solitude, which, until recently, had suited him fine. Now, the thought of returning to his solitary existence stirred an unexpected discomfort. 2 weeks stretched to 3, and spring bloomed across the landscape. Delilah grew stronger each day, now able to move around the house unassisted and help with simple cooking tasks. Yates knew he couldn't delay his departure much longer without losing the job in Wyoming altogether, yet each morning he found another reason to stay just one more day. I received a letter from the ranch owner, he finally admitted one morning over breakfast, a meal Delilah had largely prepared herself. They need to know if I'm coming. Delilah's hand stilled, her fork hovering above her plate. When would you need to leave? Tomorrow, day after at the latest. Yates watched her carefully, noticing the way she swallowed hard before nodding. Then you should go. You've done more than enough for me already. Her voice was steady, but her eyes betrayed her feelings. Delilah, please, she interrupted, finally meeting his gaze. You have your life to get back to, I understand that. I'm grateful for everything you've done, but I won't be the reason you lose your opportunity. That night, Yates packed his few belongings, his movements mechanical and reluctant. In 3 weeks, this small homestead had become more of a home to him than anywhere he'd stayed in years. Or perhaps, he admitted to himself, it wasn't the place but the person who made it feel that way. He found Delilah on the porch, wrapped in a shawl against the evening chill. Without speaking, he sat beside her on the swing. Beautiful night, she said, looking up at the star-filled sky. It is. He followed her gaze upward, then looked back at her profile. Delilah, I want you to have this, she interrupted, pressing something into his hand. Looking down, he saw a small, carved wooden horse. Jacob made it for me years ago, something to remember us by. Yates closed his fingers around the carving, his throat tight with emotion he couldn't express. I can't take this, please. It would mean a lot to know you have it. Her voice wavered slightly. A small piece of this place. Of us, her eyes seemed to say, though the words remained unspoken. Morning came too quickly. Yates saddled his mare while Delilah prepared a package of food for his journey. Their goodbye was brief and strained, neither knowing quite what to say. "You take care of yourself," Yates said, his hand lingering on hers as she handed him the food package. "Don't overdo things." "I promise," she smiled, though her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "Thank you, Yates." "For everything," he nodded, unable to trust his voice. With a final look at her face memorizing every detail, he mounted his horse and rode away, the wooden carving secure in his breast pocket. He made it exactly 3 miles before pulling his horse to a halt. "What am I doing?" he muttered to himself, staring at the road ahead. Wyoming meant good pay, steady work, and a life without Delilah Prescott. In that moment, the choice was suddenly, blindingly clear. Turning his horse around, Yates rode back toward the homestead at a gallop, heart pounding with certainty. He found Delilah where he'd left her, sitting on the porch steps, her face streaked with tears. She looked up in confusion as he dismounted and strode toward her. "Yates, did you forget something?" "Yes," he said simply, taking her hands in his. "You." Her lips parted in surprise, but before she could speak, he continued, the words rushing out now that he'd found his courage. "Delilah, I've spent my whole life drifting, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But these past weeks with you," he took a deep breath. "I don't want to leave, not now, not ever if you'll have me." "What about Wyoming?" she whispered, hope and disbelief warring in her expression. "There are ranches here, or we could work this place together." He gestured to the homestead around them. "I'm not asking for promises right now. Just a chance to see what might grow between us if we give it time." Tears filled her eyes again, but this time accompanied by a smile that transformed her face. "I'd like that," she said softly. "I'd like that very much." In that moment, as the morning sun bathed them in golden light, Yates knew he'd found something infinitely more valuable than any job could offer. He'd found a place and a person worth staying for. The summer of 1873 passed in a blur of hard work and quiet joy for Yates and Delilah. Together, they brought the neglected homestead back to life. Yates repaired fences, rebuilt the chicken coop, and expanded the garden, while Delilah regained her strength cooking, preserving food, and gradually taking on more household tasks. By midsummer, Delilah was strong enough to help with the lighter outdoor work. Yates found her one morning attempting to weed the vegetable garden, her determined expression belying the tremor still present in her hands after extended exertion. "You're pushing yourself too hard," he said, kneeling beside her. She brushed a strand of hair from her face, leaving a smudge of dirt on her cheek. "I've been idle too long. This place won't run itself." "It'll still be here tomorrow," he replied, gently taking the trowel from her hand. "Besides, I was hoping you might accompany me into town today." Her eyes lit up at the prospect. She hadn't been to Silverridge since the day Yates had found her collapsed on the boardwalk. "Really? You think I'm ready?" Dr. Finley said fresh air and moderate activity would do you good. He smiled, helping her to her feet. "And I thought you might like to choose the fabric for new curtains yourself, instead of trusting my questionable taste." 2 hours later, they rode into town together, Delilah seated in front of Yates on his mare. The townsfolk stopped to stare as they passed, many coming forward to greet Delilah with genuine pleasure at seeing her recovered. "Miss Prescott, what a blessed sight." Mrs. Fuller, the minister's wife, clasped her hands in delight. "We've been praying for your recovery." "Thank you, Mrs. Fuller," Delilah replied warmly. "I couldn't have managed without Mr. Zimmerman's help, so we've heard." The older woman's eyes twinkled as she looked between them. "Very fortunate that he was passing through when he did." They continued to the general store, where Yates helped Delilah dismount. Inside, they selected fabric for curtains and new bedding, seeds for the fall planting, and supplies they couldn't produce themselves. Throughout their shopping, Yates noticed how the shopkeeper, Mr. Holloway, and other customers watched them with undisguised curiosity. "People are talking," Delilah murmured as they waited for their purchases to be wrapped. "Let them," Yates replied, unconcerned. "Nothing improper about neighbors helping each other." "Is that what we are, neighbors?" Her voice was light, but her eyes searched his face. Before he could respond, Dr. Finley entered the store and spotted them immediately. "Miss Prescott, what a pleasure to see you up and about." He approached, medical eye assessing her improved condition. "You're looking remarkably better." "Thanks to your medicine and Mr. Zimmerman's care," she replied. "I'm almost fully recovered now." Almost, the doctor agreed with a knowing smile. Still need to be cautious, I'd wager. Good thing you have such devoted assistants. He turned to Yates. You never did make it to Wyoming, I see. Found better prospects here, Yates answered simply. Their last stop was at the small law office of Harold Jenkins. Delilah waited outside while Yates spoke privately with the attorney. When he emerged 15 minutes later, his expression was satisfied but revealed nothing of their discussion. Secret business? She asked as he helped her back onto the horse. Just getting some advice, he replied enigmatically. Nothing to trouble yourself about. The ride home was peaceful, with Delilah nestled comfortably against Yates's chest. As they crested the hill overlooking the homestead, Yates reined in the horse, allowing them both to appreciate the view. The cabin, with its newly repaired roof and smoke curling from the chimney, looked welcoming in the afternoon sun. The fields, though modest, were thriving under his care, and the few animals they kept, chickens, 2 milk cows, and a small herd of sheep they'd purchased from a neighboring farm, grazed contentedly. It's beautiful, Delilah said softly. You've brought it back to life. We have, he corrected her. Together. That evening after supper they sat on the porch as was their custom, watching fireflies dance in the gathering dusk. Delilah had been unusually quiet since their return from town. Something on your mind? Yates finally asked. She hesitated before speaking. People in town, they assume things about us, about our arrangement here. Does that bother you? Not for myself. She turned to face him directly. But you came here to help a sick woman, not to be the subject of gossip, and now that I'm better. Now that you're better, what? He prompted when she trailed off. I'm wondering what happens next. Her voice was barely above a whisper. You stayed because I needed help, but I don't need a caretaker anymore. Yates took her hand, his callous thumb gently stroking her knuckles. Is that all you think I've been, a caretaker? No, she admitted, but I'm afraid to presume more. The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken feelings that had grown over the summer months. Yates had never been a man of many words, preferring to let his actions speak for him. But now, seeing the uncertainty in Delilah's eyes, he knew words were needed. That day I rode away, he began slowly. I made it 3 miles before I realized I was making the biggest mistake of my life. Coming back wasn't about duty or obligation. It was because in 3 weeks, you'd become more important to me than anything waiting in Wyoming or anywhere else. Delilah's eyes widened, her lips parting slightly in surprise. I love you, Delilah Prescott, he continued, the words coming easier now that he'd started. I love your strength, your kindness, the way you hum when you're kneading bread. I love how you look at sunset, all golden in the light, and I'd like to keep loving you for as long as you'll let me. Tears filled her eyes, but she was smiling a radiant, joyful smile that transformed her entire face. I love you too, she whispered, so much that it frightens me sometimes. Why does it frighten you? Because I've lost everyone I've ever loved, she confessed. And the thought of losing you too. Yates gently cupped her face in his hands. You won't lose me. I'm not going anywhere. He hesitated, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small box. That's what I was discussing with Mr. Jenkins today, making sure everything was proper and legal. Opening the box, he revealed a simple gold band set with a small pearl. It was my mother's, he explained. I wrote to her last month asking her to send it. Delilah stared at the ring, then at Yates's face, wonder and disbelief mingling in her expression. I'm asking you to be my wife, Delilah, he said softly. Not because you need taking care of, but because I can't imagine my life without you in it. For a moment, she couldn't speak, overwhelmed by emotion. Then, with hands that trembled not from weakness but from joy, she reached for him. Yes, she breathed against his lips. Yes, I'll marry you. The wedding took place on a crisp October morning with the trees around the homestead ablaze in autumn colors. It was a small ceremony attended by Dr. Finley, Reverend Fuller and his wife, and a few townspeople who had become friends over the summer months. Delilah wore a simple ivory dress that Mrs. Fuller had helped her sew, with wildflowers in her hair. Yates, unaccustomed to formal attire, had nevertheless purchased a new shirt and string tie for the occasion. When he saw Delilah walking toward him in the dappled sunlight of their orchard, the look of awe on his face was worth every stitch and worry. Never seen a more beautiful bride, Doctor. Finley commented as he gave Delilah away in place of her father. The ceremony was brief but heartfelt. As they exchanged vows, Yates thought of that first day, how close he'd come to simply riding past Silverridge, never knowing what awaited him there. How different his life would have been if he hadn't stopped to help a stranger in need. "By the power vested in me," Reverend Fuller pronounced with a broad smile, "I now declare you husband and wife. Mr. Zimmerman, you may kiss your bride." Yates needed no further invitation. Gathering Delilah gently in his arms, he kissed her with all the love and promise he held in his heart, sealing their bond as their small gathering of witnesses applauded. The celebration afterward was modest but joyful, with food contributed by neighbors and music provided by a fiddler from town. As evening approached, their guests departed, leaving the newlyweds alone in their home for the first time as husband and wife. "Happy, Mrs. Zimmerman?" Yates asked, drawing Delilah close as they stood on the porch, watching the last wagon disappear down the lane. "More than I ever thought possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. "It feels like a dream sometimes. If it is, I don't want to wake up." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Come inside, I have something for you." In the cabin, Yates retrieved a package wrapped in brown paper and tied with string. "Wedding present," he explained, handing it to her. Delilah unwrapped it carefully to reveal a beautifully crafted wooden box with her new initials, DZ, inlaid in darker wood on the lid. "It's beautiful," she breathed, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "Open it," he urged softly. Inside, she found a silver spoon polished to a high shine. She looked at him questioningly. "First time I fed you," he explained, a slight flush coloring his tanned cheeks. "You were too weak to lift a spoon. Watching you get stronger day by day, seeing you fight your way back, it made me fall in love with you." Tears filled her eyes as she understood the significance of his gift. "And now I'm strong enough to feed our children someday," she whispered. Yates's breath caught at her words, at the future they promised. "Our children," he repeated, drawing her into his arms. "I like the sound of that." Winter settled over the homestead, transforming the landscape with a blanket of pristine snow. Inside the cabin, warmth prevailed both from the crackling fire in the hearth and from the love that filled the small home. Delilah thrived as a new bride, her remaining weakness fading as she embraced her role as Yates's wife and partner. For his part, Yates found a contentment he'd never known in his wandering years. The man who had never planned to stay anywhere had put down roots, deep and strong. They established rituals and traditions, weaving their separate lives into a shared tapestry. Each evening, no matter how busy the day had been, they would sit together after supper, sometimes talking, sometimes reading, often simply enjoying each other's presence. "You ever miss it?" Delilah asked one snowy evening as they sat before the fire. "The open trail, the freedom to go wherever you pleased." Yates considered the question, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Sometimes I miss the stars," he admitted. "Sleeping under an open sky has its charm." He kissed the top of her head. "But I'd trade all the stars in the heavens for one night beside you." Spring brought new beginnings in more ways than one. As the land awakened from its winter slumber, Delilah discovered she was expecting their first child. "Are you certain?" Yates asked, his voice hushed with wonder when she told him. "Dr. Finley confirmed it yesterday," she replied, unable to contain her smile. "We're going to have a baby, Yates, in the fall." He lifted her off her feet, spinning her around with joy before quickly setting her down again. "Should I be doing that? Is it safe for you for the baby?" Delilah laughed, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "I'm with child, not made of glass. Dr. Finley says I'm in excellent health now." Nevertheless, Yates watched over her with renewed vigilance as the months passed and her body changed. He took on more of her chores despite her protests and made sure she rested each afternoon. "You're fussing worse than an old hen," she teased him in her 7th month, as he insisted on carrying a basket of laundry that weighed less than their cat. "Just taking care of my family," he replied unapologetically. The word family never failed to bring a glow to Delilah's face. After losing everyone, she was building something new, something precious beyond measure. As autumn painted the landscape once more, Delilah's time drew near. Yates had prepared everything: clean linens, boiled water, a message ready to send to Dr. Finley at the first sign of labor. Still, when the moment actually arrived, he found himself nearly paralyzed with fear. "It's too early," he protested when Delilah gasped, clutching her rounded belly. "You're not due for another week." "Babies come when they're ready, not according to our plans," she replied through gritted teeth. "Yates, you need to get the doctor. Now." The next hours were the longest of Yates's life. Dr. Finley arrived quickly, but labor progressed slowly. Banished from the bedroom, Yates paced the small cabin, flinching at each cry that escaped his wife's lips. "This is normal, Mrs. Fuller assured him when she arrived to assist the doctor. "Women have been bringing babies into the world since Eve." "Not my woman," Yates muttered, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "Not my baby." As dawn broke over the eastern hills, a new cry joined Delilah's, the lusty wail of a newborn taking its first breath. Yates froze mid-pace, his heart seemingly stopped in his chest as he waited. The bedroom door opened, and Dr. Finley appeared, his tired face breaking into a smile. "Congratulations, Mr. Zimmerman, you have a son, a strong, healthy boy." Yates stumbled forward, and Delilah, exhausted but well, "She's asking for you." Nothing could have prepared Yates for the sight that awaited him. Delilah, her face glowing despite the exhaustion evident in her features, cradled a small bundle against her breast. She looked up as he entered, her smile radiant. "Come meet your son," she whispered. Approaching the bed on unsteady legs, Yates gazed down at the tiny face nestled against his wife's body. The baby had a shock of dark hair, and when he briefly opened his eyes, they were the same stormy blue as his father's. "He's perfect," Yates breathed, gently touching one tiny hand with his finger. The baby reflexively grasped it, his entire hand barely encircling Yates's fingertip. "So small, but strong," Delilah assured him, "just like his father." "What shall we name him?" Yates asked, unable to tear his gaze from his son's face. Delilah hesitated. "I was thinking, perhaps Jacob after my brother." Tears pricked Yates's eyes as he nodded. "Jacob Zimmerman, it's a good name, a strong name." He swallowed hard, overcome with emotion. "Thank you, Delilah, for what?" "For our son, for making me the happiest man alive." He carefully sat beside her on the bed, wrapping one arm around her shoulders. "For being too weak to lift a spoon that day in Silverridge." She laughed softly, leaning into his embrace. "Thank you for being patient enough to feed me until I could feed myself." As the first rays of sunlight spilled through the window, illuminating the new family in its golden glow, Yates marveled at how completely his life had changed in the span of a year and a half. From a solitary drifter to a husband and father rooted firmly in love and purpose. "I love you," he whispered, pressing a kiss to Delilah's temple. "And I love you," she replied, her eyes drifting closed as exhaustion claimed her. "Always." Years passed, and the Zimmerman homestead flourished, much like the family that called it home. Yates and Delilah worked side by side, turning the modest property into one of the most prosperous small farms in the region. They added rooms to the cabin as their family grew, eventually building a larger home on the same spot where they had begun their life together. Jacob, their firstborn, was joined by a sister, Emma, 2 years later, and then by twins, Samuel and Sarah, 3 years after that. Each child brought new joy and challenges, and Yates embraced fatherhood with the same quiet dedication he brought to everything that mattered. On a warm summer evening in 1883, 10 years after they had first met, Yates and Delilah sat on the porch of their home, watching their children play in the yard. Jacob, now nearly 10, was teaching 6-year-old Samuel how to throw a lasso, while 8-year-old Emma supervised her younger sister's attempts to make a daisy chain. "They're growing so fast," Delilah observed, her head resting comfortably on Yates's shoulder. "Too fast," he agreed, his arm secure around her waist. At 38, Yates had silver threading through his dark hair and lines at the corners of his eyes that spoke of both laughter and the harsh prairie sun. Delilah, at 34, was more beautiful to him than ever, her figure softened by motherhood, her amber eyes still bright with the same spirit that had captured his heart a decade before. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd kept riding that day?" she asked, voicing a question they rarely discussed. Yates considered for a moment. "Sometimes. But then I look at them," he nodded toward their children, "and at you, and I know there was never any real choice. My heart knew where it belonged before my head caught up." Delilah smiled, entwining her fingers with his. "Even when I was too weak to feed myself, especially then," he replied, bringing her hand to his lips. "You fought so hard to live, to recover. How could I not fall in love with that kind of courage?" From the yard came a chorus of shouts as Jacob successfully demonstrated his roping skills, much to his younger siblings' delight. Delilah laughed, the sound still as musical to Yates's ears as it had been the first time he heard it. "I think the children have something planned for our anniversary next month," she confided, lowering her voice. "Emma can barely contain herself, and Jacob has been very mysterious lately." "As long as it doesn't involve frogs in the house again," Yates replied with mock sternness, remembering a previous surprise that had gone awry. Their conversation was interrupted by the twins running toward them, faces alight with excitement. "Papa, Mama, come see what Jacob did," they chorused. Hand in hand, Yates and Delilah rose from the porch to join their children, stepping together into the golden evening light. As they crossed the yard, Yates glanced at his wife, still sometimes amazed that this life, this love was his. From strangers thrown together by circumstance to partners bound by the deepest love, their journey had been one of patience, healing, and unwavering devotion. What had begun with a simple act of kindness, a cowboy feeding a weakened woman with gentle hands, and a caring heart, had blossomed into a lifetime of shared joys and challenges. And as the sun set on another day of their life together, Yates silently thanked whatever fate or providence had led him to Silverridge on that fateful day. For in helping Delilah find her strength again, he had discovered his own greatest strength, the capacity to love and be loved, completely and without reservation. "What are you thinking about?" Delilah asked, catching his thoughtful expression. Yates smiled, squeezing her hand. "Just that sometimes the best journeys are the ones that lead you home." And home, he knew with absolute certainty, would always be wherever Delilah was.